So I'm going to put the left piece in first, make the cut on my jig. Both sides will equal 90 degrees once you rotate the piece. So I'll make the first cut, then rotate there to the other side, and I'll make the second cut. So here I've made the first cut on this one piece. This is the top and bottom, so I'm making first. So you have to do it this way to get a good 45 degrees on that angle. It's not so much has to be centered with the blade, just as long as it's equaling 90 degrees on these two cuts. So I'm going to rotate my piece here, and at the end you can't see it, but the end on the far side of my right hand I have another 45 stop block set up so I can know exactly when the frame dimension I'm going to is 27 degrees. I just move it down to 27 inches rather, move it down to 27 inches so I can know where to make my cut. As you can see here, I've already put in my rabbets that I've done before. I made these pieces because it's so much easier to do them, to mill these out before I make any angled cuts. That's why I do that, and I'm trying to allow for any movement for the picture frame and everything that's going to go in it on each side a 1/4 inch. So that will allow for all that. I like to put a knife wall into the wood before I make the cut, and this keeps down any tear out and makes the joint look a lot crisper. And you kind of have to sneak up on the cut. You'll cut it first, and as you see here in just a moment, and now hold it down with a toggle clamp for safety again. So as you see, I will make the cut first. Now I kind of will go just proud of the line at first, and then I'll come in and I'll try to sneak up on the cut. If I show it at a different angle maybe. This is the same cut, but I'm going to show a different angle. Now you see the pencil mark I've marked at the 45. That's just the pencil mark. It looks crooked, but that's actually a knife cut in that. So I'm going to make this cut just proud of the line. And you'll see it's just off the line about a 32nd or so, a millimeter or so. Now move it just a little bit closer to get that final cut that I want. You can see as you make the cut, the pieces just fly off, and you're left with a nice crisp line there. There we go. That's the cut we're looking for. Here I've got an inlay made of purple heart that I want to put in this frame of Mickey Mouse's head, and I'm trying to measure in the center where I want to put Mickey. So I'm going to measure the dead center, and that's where it's going to go. To make this inlay, you need to cut exactly the piece out first, then cut exactly around this inlay. I've used some CA glue up under this purple heart that you can't see, but to hold it perfectly still while I make the cut. Now, if you have any movement while cutting this, then your inlay is not going to be as precise as you want it. I'm making a mark just so I can see, because you can't cut the mark. You can't mark it then cut it. You have to cut exactly the piece you're given. And as you can see, my piece isn't perfect. I will clean that up a lot more. But no matter how you do this, it takes a lot of practice, and I'm not by any means perfect doing this, but it takes a lot of practice. I'm just going to I did my marking knife first, and then I take a razor blade just to make sure I can get as close as I can to this piece, because I'm later going to route out most of it and then chisel the rest of it out by hand to get that to get the fit I want with the inlay. Here, of course, you want to be very careful not to let anything slip when you cut your hand. I just work my way around the entire piece. That's the part we'll cut out right there. I'm using a 1/4 inch straight bit. Here, I tried to get my router down from 30,000 RPMs to about 15,000, about half speed, 15,000 RPM, just because it has more control. Because when you're routing it with wood, as most of you will know, but if you don't know, you have soft and hard grain in the wood, and each one goes a little different, and the router is going to want to follow the softer wood or maybe sometimes the hardwood, depending on what you're given. But you want to be very careful. You don't want to go all the way up to the line. You can go up to the line. I like to go just off the line because I'm afraid my router will slip, and once it slips outside your line, your inlay is finished. So I will see if I can get as close as I can with most of them, and I apologize for not being able to see better, but I'm going to try to get as close or as much material out as close to the line as I can here, and then do the rest by hand. It took me a while to get this all out, but I think it paid off pretty good in the end. I'm just going to use my small chisel to finish up right up to the line. Being ever so careful, and again, you want to be very careful not to let the chisel slip off, because it will cut your hand with just a little nick. It's just a little slip. It's going to cut your hand. And I'm test fitting the piece, see how much I am off, and I'm off on that corner and also in the middle of the ears. So I'm going to try to take care of that. I think I'll make that work. I think chiseling out by hand, and I apologize for hitting the camera there, but I think chiseling out by hand is very satisfying. Without sharp chisels, your chisels are going to want to go in the way of the softer wood also. You could go deeper with an inlay, but it's really kind of pointless because you're only going to see the surface, but that was a fit I was satisfied with there. And we're going to move on to gluing up the joints. What I like to do is brush on some glue first, let it dry a little bit, and then come back, put more glue later, because most of it gets soaked up on the end grain, because end grain is not a very strong joint. And later I'm going to put splines in, but here I'm just applying my glue for my corners. And as you can see, my table's not perfectly flat, but I want my joint to look good. So I'm going to use some shims in here to make up any gap you see right there on both sides. I want to make sure I get it exactly square, so the frame is going to be square and not higher at one end or the other. So I'm going to place a shim on both the top and side pieces, or this is the bottom piece. And I just use some simple painter's tape to hold the joint together. That seems to work really well for me, because like I said, later I'm going to put some splines in there to make this a much stronger joint than just a simple butt joint. It might be okay, but I think over time, the expansion and contraction of any wood, it's eventually, I think, going to fail. But it would last a while if it's done correct. So this tape method works really good. So I'm just showing you the nice crisp 45s there. Got them taped up. Let those dry. Checking everything, make sure it's good and square. Now here I have another jig, a spline jig that I use, and I've marked out where I want my splines to go up to that point right there on the corner. Not quite halfway, but close. And we use my spline jig to cut the splines on the ends And I do have a video one of these days coming out with making the spline jig. It's not the safest spline jig, but it works. I plan to make another one at some point. But you're just going to sit on your table saw. It's going right up against the fence. Your frame will sit down in the V there, and you'll just cut the spline. So I'll put the frame down in the spline jig there. I use these clamps to hold the front and the back of the piece so it remains still in there. You don't want it moving around or your cut will be off. The problem with this jig, and it works okay, but the problem with you have to make sure it rides up against your fence exactly, or your spline won't be 90 degrees. And I'll just cut through the corner here. Now do this for all four corners, and all you do is just rotate the piece, and you cut the next corner and move on till all four are done. I love Purple Heart. It's dense. It's a nice wood. Here I'm going to cut the Purple Heart that's going to be used, that I used earlier for Mickey's head, but I'm also going to cut these down for the splines that's going to go in the corners that I just cut. Now I put the splines in, they dried up, and I'm just going to saw off the excess here with my Japanese saw. I really like this saw, but I'm going to cut the excess off with this, and then I'll sand the rest down here in just a minute. And just sand it down smooth at the ends. And here I'm going to take a tack cloth that I like to use to wipe down any sawdust or any kind of imperfections on the frame. Getting ready to put a finish on it, so I want to make sure it's good and clean. I did a laser etch on. I'll show you later, but I did a laser etch down there of a Disney character, Belle, off Beauty and the Beast, with the words "Be Our Guest" on that. So I blew that out with the air hose. But I'm wiping this down as much as I possibly can because I don't want anything on here when I go to finish this. I love the way those splines turned out. And you can see a good close-up of this laser etch that I had done of Belle and Be Our Guest. And of course Mickey. I'm going to put on a shellac, but first I want to sand it down. But the shellac I'm going to use is a Zinsser de-waxed shellac. You'll see in a moment I will use a 50-50 mineral spirits and shellac mix, but I'm going to sand down the frame. I think I may have put a coat on here, and then I'm going to sand it down to about 220 or 300 or so. Just a light sanding, just a good light sanding to seal up any imperfections even further. But I would just lightly sand over the entire frame, and then in a little bit I'm going to put that 50-50 mix, wipe it on again. And I like to do that because you can apply the in between coats. I think I wind up having a total of 4 to 5 coats. I think it's 5 on this frame, but you can put more coats on it a lot sooner versus waiting an hour in between coats. So, but it's a lot faster. You don't have to wait near as long. I want to show you this 50-50 mix. Just put in a water bottle if you want, and just put in your towel there and start applying it. It's thick still, even at 50-50, but it's a lot easier to put on. A lot more forgiving when you can do it this way. And you can see a better view of the laser etching that I had done. This is Belle from Beauty and the Beast and Be Our Guest, and you can see the final finish of the coats I had put on there, and it looks really, really nice. I was really tickled how this turned out. It's a Disney puzzle that she's putting together, my daughter-in-law, one of my daughter-in-laws. So I'm making her a frame to go with that whole theme, and it has a lot of purple type colors in it, which is why I use Purple Heart and of course Mickey and the Purple Heart splines. If you have any questions, just be glad to ask anything, things I've done different, things I should do better. I'm sure there's plenty. Just let me know, and I hope you enjoy the video.